Hello everybody and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode number 18, Developing with Vue.js, Node.js, and MongoDB. I'm your host Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again by my co-host Mike Karan. Now, a brief foreword, I guess it would be called. I'm on vacation next week, so this episode has been recorded about a week in advance. As a result, instead of doing our quote-unquote what's up this week, this entire episode is actually focusing on exactly what we've been up to this week, actually for the past 2 weeks. So let's get going into it. I'm going to introduce the show, and then I'm going to go through the segments, and then we will continue as we always do. So in this episode, we'll be discussing our journey through learning a variety of new technologies to create and deploy the HTML All the Things website. At each step in the development, we face new challenges using Vue.js, which we have never used in a production project. And on top of that, the entire deployment method we used was entirely new to us. So the reason why I'm even mentioning this is that we are still newbies at this. So if you think that you have any suggestions, like, maybe we're doing something really inefficiently, or you have something specific that you want to tell us, or a better way to do it, whatever, feel free to reach out to us on social media, or maybe make a post in the subreddit, because as I said, we are newbies, and this episode is focusing on our specific experience. Now, if we jump into the show here, we have all of our segments. Segment number 1, Vue.js front-end development. We then have segment number 2, which is Node.js and MongoDB back-end development. Segment number 3, which is DigitalOcean and Docker deployment. And then web news, which is entitled Wrapping It Up This Week. So, let's jump right into the first segment. So this is covering kind of more my part right now. So I'm the front-end developer on this project, and I've never used JS before, Vue.js before. So everything down to my development environment was completely changed. So instead of using Notepad++, HTML, CSS, and JS, I started using Visual Studio Code, so VS Code, alongside a plugin called, hopefully I'm saying this right, Vetur. It's VETUR. And that offers things like syntax highlighting, auto-completion, and a bunch more features within VS Code. The most valuable parts, I would say, starting to work with Vue.js is that I saw that there was these things called components and these other things called scoped style sheets. So I'm going to kind of like dive into, my sort of description of how I'm experiencing it of each of these. So in components, or for components are like very small pieces that make up a website, and they're put into separate files that we import into the main app.vue file. Components can be imported into each other as well, and they're very useful for repeat sections or parts of a site that will be appearing over and over again, such as content boxes, or as we call them, collection boxes. An example of a set of components that we're using are, for example, the podcast episode.vue file. So that is our full podcast page. And what I mean by full podcast page is it's not the little square that you click on to read the whole post. It's like the actual it's the actual page that has an embedded player in it. It has a cover photo. It has the show notes in there. It has links. It has whatever we wanted to write about. It has it all in there. And that type of thing is that's in our podcast episode.vue. But every single one of these full post pages, because there's, like I just said, the one for the podcast, but there's ones for blogs, there's ones for templates, there's one for all this. Those are all separate components, but each one of them has a common piece, which is what we call the availability bar. And the availability bar houses all the buttons to all the different platforms that we host various elements onto. So, for example, on the podcast, we have it's on everything. So it's like it's on Podbean, it's on Google Play Music, it's on Spotify, etc., or wherever you're listening to this on, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, whatever. And so we have a bunch of buttons that will appear on there. Now that's a dynamic set of buttons that will show up for different things. So on templates, it might just show GitHub, or maybe it'll show GitHub and then a store if we've listed it on some sort of theme marketplace, or that type of thing. So that's what the availability bar is. So we have a separate availability bar.vue file, which is another component, and that availability bar goes into, in this case, the podcast episode.vue. It also goes into all the other ones, all the other full post pages, like I said, for the templates and whatever else. So that's rather interesting. That's a rather interesting way to make a program, I found. It's almost like it's almost like making little condensed programs. It's basically like if you took a design, which we did, if we took like a wireframe, we can say like, okay, this piece of the wireframe, like these content boxes, in our case we call them collection boxes. These collection boxes can be one piece, the hub can be this other piece, etc., etc., etc. And that'll transition nicely into my second example, which is we have hub.view, which is another component, and it has collectionbox.view embedded in it. So I'll explain that. So what it is let's say you go to the HTML all the things homepage, right? You're presented immediately with like sort of like I never really understand how, or never really know what to call these things because they're called so many different things, but it's literally just the hub. That's what we call it. And it has all of the different squares of, it has a little thumbnail, it has your date, it has the title of your article, and if you click on one of those squares, there's like a grid of them. If you click on one of those squares, it goes to the full post page, like for example, the podcast episode page. So that's our hub. Our hub houses all of the little squares, or in our case, we call them collection boxes. So in this case, we have two components that we've made. We have hub.view, like I mentioned, which is housing all of the collection box.views, and the collection box.views, and Mike will get into this more in the next piece, but collection box.view is automatically populated and created. So all the collection boxes are made via a dynamic system based on what's in the database as to what articles we actually have like on the website. Do we have a bunch of show notes? Do we have a bunch of templates this week? Do we have a bunch of blog posts? Whatever, right? So that's kind of like I think a comprehensive example of like kind of how components work, and that's kind of how I've been using them, and it's interesting because it's a different mentality when you're making a site to sort of break it up into modular pieces and actually have those pieces be separate files, so you can just kind of be like, I'm going to focus on the content on the collection box, I'm going to focus on the podcast episode page. So it's kind of an interesting but like more focused way of developing, I would say. But that's my 2 cents at the end there. So another part that I really liked was a thing called scoped style sheets. So scoped style sheets limit the styles that you're typing in within the file that you're coding in. So in our case, we limited a bunch of styles to the scope of the component that they're in. And this is very helpful when you want to have the same descriptive name for an element, but the styles themselves need to be different. So for example, normally you'd only be able to have one class name be cover-photo, let's say. But with the scoped attribute on that style sheet, you could have all your components have the cover-photo class name, but have the cover-photo class name have actually different properties and it actually look different for each one of those components, because the scoped attribute keeps all of the styles scoped to that particular component. So this is really useful, like I said, just for that example there. But another thing that we did was I made up all of the full post pages, right? So I made up, there was podcast, there was one for templates, there was one for snippets, there was one for whatever, right? And what I did was I realized, I was like, oh, a lot of these are common, but there's like some that need to be a little bit different. So I took the scoped attribute out of one of the components. I made a bunch of the generic assets with generic and descriptive names in that one component without the scoped attribute. So now it applies to all the components. And then I made each of the other pages. So I took actually the blog post page. I took the blog post component, took out the scoped, put all the generic changes in there, and then on all the other components that were more advanced, so for example, like the podcast page, it's the only page that has an embedded player, whereas the other pages are the only ones that have, let's say, a gallery or something like that. So I have specific scoped styles for each of those, and that again is like a real different way of thinking about it, rather than how I would normally do it with just like having a CSS file or two, and where I'm like, worried about conflicts and want to have different names, and maybe like names, compiled with IDs, and I'm overwriting properties, or I'm having conflicts there. And that's kind of where most glitches come from, where you like forget to change a property when you're trying to move it around at different responsivities and that type of thing. Like a front-end developer would get this, right? Because it's kind of all over the place. Like CSS kind of gets all over the place later on in the project, especially when you're testing. You're like, why is this not moving? And you're like, oh, I still have as position absolute, for example. So the scope style sheets is a real big help, and it's a different way of thinking when it comes to actually putting together a web page, or in this case a component, where it's easier to actually like put it together and sort of keep it together and keep your project together. Now, one thing I will say is that I'm not using anything special, if you will. I'm not using Bootstrap. I'm not using any of that. I'm literally just using CSS within this, and I am just straight up using HTML. Along with some Vue stuff, and I'll talk about that now. So one of my biggest challenges with using Vue.js has been adapting to the class and style bindings. So they're basically how I control some of the UI elements on the page, and in my case, it's specifically for visibility, like conditional visibility. And I had to fight the urge to simply use a JavaScript, like just like a standard JS script, which I could have done, like it would have worked. But because I want to use Vue.js for everything that it is, or everything that it has to offer, and I want to like, quote unquote, use it like properly. Like I know you could use JS, but I kind of want to use it the right way and like have Vue.js itself take on whatever it can take on, especially when it's like it's not hurting the project in any way. It's still efficient. So that's been one of my that's been one of my challenging things. I'm just trying to wrap my head around that. I understand it's probably like super simple for a lot of other people, but I think it's like a mentality change where it's normally I'm just controlling it with a real quick like, oh, just display none here or visibility none here, or even with a media with like an at media breakpoint. But in general, like it's just a weird mentality, and I always mess up the variables and stuff like that. So and I'm still getting used to reading the errors. So it's more of a mentality change more than like oh man, this is so technically challenging, and I'm still new at it, obviously. But it was also challenging for me to set up the dynamic data on the page, most of which was done by Mike, specifically when it came to pieces of information that needed to be pulled from the database. But I was putting in some dynamic data that was like more scripted or more like not going to change. So dynamic data like the company name, and maybe like a couple of like links to websites or that type of thing, like a link to like socials and that type of thing. Those things aren't really going to change, and some of those, not all of them, are hard coded. They're not in the database. But I put them in like dynamically, so I could just change the variable and it would change across all of them. Again, it's like an easy thing. It's like, oh, you just changed a variable name. But it's just getting into the knack of being like, I can't just var it. I have to like go in here and like declare it here in Vue.js. Then I have to call it here. I have to add it as like a property. I have to like move it around a lot and that type of thing. So that was a little bit challenging. And just to kind of reiterate, to be clear, these challenges weren't so much technical, but rather more of a procedural challenge. I'm not used to having these type of elements in my workflow, and breaking old habits, as everyone knows, is rather difficult, especially when you're presented with learning something completely new. But it's all working now, and I'm glad it's done this way because it really furthered my knowledge of Vue.js, and I learned how to read a bunch of the different types of error logs. I'm still learning, but I learned how to like read and interpret a lot of the error logs, and I'm slowly starting to understand Vue.js. And I think Mike and I are getting to the point where we could confidently actually make a site with Vue, as well as the rest of the stack, which I'll let him cover later in the show. It's like we're getting confident, so we could actually do it for a customer themselves. I think what I'll do now is I'm going to pass it to Mike, because Mike has a couple of things to talk about the front end development.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think you covered that really well. I actually didn't know that you were using the scoped style sheets, like unscoped the one style sheet. That's cool. I didn't realize what was happening actually when I was testing everything. So yeah, that's good to know. I'm glad you're using it for its actual purpose. But other than that, let's get into a little bit more on the technical side of Vue. So there's a few technologies that I've kind of been introduced to since our last Vue episode, and the three mainly are ViewX, ViewRouter, and Axios. All three of these are first-party libraries, which is something I find kind of cool with Vue, is that as in comparison to React, maybe, where React has like a good base, but most of its like most important libraries are actually third party, so created by developers that aren't associated with React. Whereas Vue has a lot of really good first party libraries, so you don't have to go out and look for third party developers to supplement the actual like core base of your technology, which I find is a big benefit in terms of longevity and potentially using it in production down the road, where you don't know what a third party is going to be up to. Even if they're reliable, something could happen and they could abandon development, and that's it. Where as a first party, you kind of know that it'll pass from hand to hand internally, and that's probably a better system for it. So again, we're going to be talking about these three libraries. I'll kind of throughout this whole episode, I'll kind of only mention like the general core purpose of a technology, and then how we use that technology inside of our actual application, the Hat website. I'm not going to go too in depth with each technology because I think that each technology will pretty much merit an episode on its own, and I don't have the knowledge base right now currently to be able to do an episode on just one of these technologies. I hope to be able to develop my knowledge base to do that eventually in the future for everyone. But for now, I'm just going to give you a kind of a very good overview of how we're using them. So let's start with ViewX. So ViewX is a state management solution inside of Vue. And what it pretty much does is it gives like a global object to all of your components that they could share data. And this is important because for us, we're using it to store our logged in status. So how our application works is we have like kind of an admin side, an admin panel, and we have like the client side, or like what you will all see when you go to the website. You'll see like just the content blocks or the collection boxes and the nav bar and stuff like that. But what we can do is we can log in and then see kind of the same thing that you see, but with an admin panel overlay over top of it, where we can add, delete, edit, stuff like that, those content blocks. So what I'm using ViewX, the state management solution, for is actually storing the logged in information and storing all the methods for being able to get that information back from the server. So in that case, any component that needs this logged in status, that has those admin privileges, will just reference one object called a store.js object, which is where I'm going to be using ViewX, and they'll be able to then access all the information stored in that object, like, are you logged in currently? What are the credentials? Where is your like session token? Stuff like that. So I'll be able to, I extract all the information and I use that to conditionally show, conditionally hide things, and conditionally make some routes inaccessible to people that are not logged in. Like, no one not logged in can add anything, delete anything, or edit anything. That just makes sense. And then no one logged in can actually see the admin panel. So those are the kinds of things I'm using VX for. The next thing would be ViewRouter. This is just like a built-in library router, so that you're able to actually navigate around your site. So you can use slash hub, and then you can get to the hub slash content block with maybe a parameter of like the content block ID to get to the content block, stuff like that. So ViewRouter allows us to put in routes, declare routes inside of Vue.js, and then use them throughout your application as well. They're kind of also accessed globally throughout any component throughout the ViewRouter object, so it's really useful like that. And it also adds in features like on route change, so you can always be watching for a route change, and then based on the route change, you can do something in a separate component to component basis, which I find really cool. It's a fairly simple library, so it shouldn't be too hard to start up and use. And I definitely recommend it for anyone using an application that requires any sort of routing, going home about anything like that. It's really easy to set up. And the third one is Axios. So Axios is also a first-party library, and it's the kind of the HTTP request library for Vue. So something like an AJAX request, stuff like that. So that's what it does, and it's just as simple as it sounds. So it uses promises instead of callbacks, which I find more progressive. It's a better way to do it nowadays. So you put a .then after you do your HTTP request. And again, it's a very simple library. If you've ever used an HTTP request, if you've ever used an AJAX request, you'll understand how to use it pretty much by reading the documentation. And I just want to really commend the documentation of Vue.js, because I very rarely had to go out of my way to look for like a Stack Overflow article or like a any sort of other form where I would need to find other information that wasn't contained inside of the documentation for Vue.js. So huge kudos to I think his first name is Evan. So huge kudos to that guy. He's done really good job with the documentation, and like I'm huge advocate of Vue.js at this point. Just from it's been a few months now with experience, so I wouldn't say it's a lot, but from the experience that I have. So that's about it for just kind of talking about Vue.js stuff and front end stuff. And I just want to go back and now go on to segment 2, which we'll be talking about Node.js MongoDB and the backend development stuff. So this stuff, I'm not the strongest at backend development. I have done a couple projects where I've had to use like a significant amount of PHP. I've had one project where I had to use this exact stack, where as in like the Node.js MongoDB stack, and I was fairly successful with that. So I would say, a foot in the door. I wouldn't say I'm at all like experienced in this. So it was definitely a challenge. And thankfully, with this kind of project, it was a good step in, it was a good like right step in the direction, because it wasn't too complicated to set up. So pretty much, I'll start with Node.js. So the Node.js, for anyone that doesn't know, Node.js is kind of like a server infrastructure technology that uses JavaScript as its language. So you can kind of run JavaScript throughout your whole entire platform. It's really good at handling multiple like requests to it. It's really good at load balancing those requests. But other than that, like, it's similar to PHP in what it can do. So just imagine if you're a PHP developer and you haven't heard of Node.js, Node.js can do most of the functionality, if not all of PHP, just using the JavaScript language, using its own framework, stuff like that. So pretty much what we're using Node.js for is to be able to handle calls from the front end and receive and send data from the front end to the back end. So what that means is that the server has to handle many calls and requests. So a request might be to get all the content from the database. A request might be get all content of a specific type from the database. So get me all the podcast episodes. Get me then there's a request might be a post request. So this would be like sending it to the server, would be add content of a specific type to the database. So I want to add a podcast episode to the database with all this information filled out. Send it, and the database, the Node.js, will handle the transition from taking it from the front end, converting it to something the database will understand, and sending it to the database and storing it there. And then saving a reference to it, obviously. So then there's also delete content, and then authentication is another one. So authentication means, like I was saying with ViewX before on the front end, we need to be able to make sure that there's some routes that are secured and some information that's secured. And what we do with Node.js is we actually use it to handle the logging in aspect and the storing of client credentials and the actual login, response tokens and stuff like that. So the front end will contact the back end. The back end will do all the login stuff, and it will respond back with saying if the credentials that you entered are correct, and then if the credentials are correct, it'll send you a login token, like a token that you can enter into your actual website, the header of the website, and then use that further on, so you don't have to keep contacting the back end. The tokens are really good to use because, again, it alleviates the need to contact the back end constantly for every single request that you make. So pretty much, those are the major things that the server will do. And even though these are standard server requests, it still took some time to set up, just because, again, I don't have that vast knowledge and vast experience, and I also have never set up a separate front end communicating with the back end. I've always used the built-in templating engine, I think it's called Handlebars. I use that on Node.js, and so that was a little bit more native and easier to understand when I was learning Node. This was a separate thing, not too much of a difference. So it just responds with data instead of responding with like an actual request to go to a different route, which is fairly simple to understand. But again, it took me a little bit of time, and I just want to say that it wasn't like an easy, bam, I understand this. This was a 2-week period of me crunching through almost all these technologies, having very little knowledge in each of them. So it was an interesting experience. I had to do this while balancing my other client work, so that was also cool. So good project management experience, good experience just learning technologies and managing and staying sane, because this was definitely a crunch on the mind. So that was Node.js. Let's move on to MongoDB real quick. So Mongo is a database that stores objects as JSON blocks. So it's an alternative to SQL. So if you're familiar with SQL, MongoDB can kind of handle the information that stuff that SQL can handle a little bit differently. I believe it's a relational database as opposed to SQL. So that's kind of like the comparison that some people make. We're using it as a very rudimentary database. It's not gonna, like, in my eye, I don't think it's ever gonna store more than like 10,000 objects in it, which is very small. Like you could technically do that with like a JSON file. It's more learning the technology, learning how to use it eventually in a future project to be able to implement a larger database with a much larger impact on your website. So I'm not too worried about the optimizations. Like I know for sure 100% SQL can handle this just as well as Mongo would. That wasn't the reason I made the decision to use Mongo. The reason I made the decision is because using Node.js, I know that there's a lot of very good tie-ins to Mongo. And I know that Mongo, I like the fact that it stores stuff in JSON because I understand JSON really well, and that's kind of, it was like, I understand it. That's why I want to use it. That was the only reason. It wasn't a performance thing. So I just want to make that clear. So pretty much what we use it for is just storing our content block data. So our content blocks consist of stuff like title, date, the type of content block, and then it will consist of like an array of objects where each object is a different availability bar component. So the availability bar components will be like, this is a tune-in component and it has this link. This is a Podbean component and it has this link. This is a Podcaxbox component and it has this link. So you're able to kind of access everything you need inside of a content block. I have it set up in a little bit differently, where I have preview blocks as a separate collection in the database, so that when you load the web page initially, it'll get your like the preview blocks that you need, and the preview blocks only have only 4 or 5 attributes, and they should be very quick to respond to the server. And I'm doing that so that you don't load all this useless information on load and get your loading times down. Right off the bat. You can just kind of load in the background the information that you need on the page, and I'll eventually probably have some hooks in place where if a person loads the page, they get everything loaded, start loading like the first like 6 content blocks that you see there, start loading that information on the page before you continue on. So that's kind of a future project, and actually that perfectly leads into the next part of this, is what still needs to be done. So we still need to get a DigitalOcean Spaces section, and what Spaces is like a place to store all of your it's like a bucket to store all of your content. So in content, I mean like images. Mostly for us, it's going to be images. Right now, we're just kind of storing it on the server side. It's not a huge deal for us right now. I know it's not like the proper way to do it. It's not a huge deal for us right now because the amount of images we have is very small. The amount of space, like even on the cheapest DigitalOcean container, DigitalOcean droplet is 25 gigs, and we have like, I don't know, 15 images. It's irrelevant right now, but I want to very soon set up that Spaces so that we can kind of alleviate the load from the server's bandwidth to the Spaces bandwidth, and then we can store all of the images in a space on DigitalOcean and not have all the images stored locally. And then in the future, when we expand, when we have more images, we don't have to blog up the server with actually serving the images as well as serving the website content and the database content. So that's something that I still want to do, and I want to do fairly quickly. The next thing I would like to do is have Cloudflare CDN spread our content. So I want to look into that. I'm not like very familiar with Cloudflare. I've just heard it in passing many times. I've looked it up maybe a couple times. Nothing too intense, but all I know is that it'll take our website and kind of spread it across the globe into its servers, and it'll kind of alleviate also the bandwidth on our server. So people will be able to access the website quicker in different areas. So not just like, if DigitalOcean just has it in one hub, central hub, Cloudflare will take that and spread it into like many different hubs across the world and handle all the requests for you and stuff like that. So I definitely want to look into that. I want to see how that works, how much it costs, and hopefully we'll have some information for you. Maybe we'll do either a segment or an episode on Cloudflare, because it seems really interesting and a very powerful tool to me. That pretty much wraps up the backend development side of this. Matt, did you have anything to add to the backend, or should I move on to the deployment?
I think you covered that rather well, and like I'm not super involved into it, so I think next section sounds good to me.
Okay, sounds good. So let's get through the deployment. So for deployment, this was definitely the most challenging section for me. I don't understand DevOps that well. I've never really done deployment stuff. Matt actually usually handles our deployment of anything, like just even to a static server, or he's really the guy that would go and do any sort of Linux administration stuff as well, and he knows that much better than I do. But what I decided to do for this one is because I know I'm using all these technologies, it would be tough for me to kind of explain to Matt how they need to be set up to communicate with each other. So I decided to just kind of take it on myself and try it out. So what we decided was we decided to use DigitalOcean for our VPS, virtual private server. That will be running kind of like a Linux installation. And with that, I wanted to use something that would be a little bit more. I wanted to just not use like a regular Linux installation. I wanted to use something that would be more transferable in the future. So I decided to go look into Docker. Docker is a really cool system where it allows you the ability to create small virtualizable containers for each technology in your stack. So you it's kind of like creating like a mini VM almost with like a Linux installation running, but it strips everything out that's not needed. And like if you need a Node.js Docker, it'll only run the stuff in there that needs Node.js, which is kind of cool to me. And another really big positive of it is I can set it up locally on my computer if I want and have it mimic exactly my environment in deployment, because all these containers are going to be exactly the same. And I like the fact that DigitalOcean had like a ready to go one-click Docker installation, so I didn't have to go in there and spend any time installing Docker on top of it. Not that that's a very complicated process. It seemed pretty simple even on Linux, even to a Linux newbie like I am, so not a big deal. But I like the fact that I could save maybe 10-20 minutes of my time. So what we decided to do with this Docker DigitalOcean combination is then set up 3 containers. So the 3 containers that we would need, the first one is Nginx. So Nginx is like a web server, and it allows you to serve static files. It's similar to Apache, if you know Apache. Nginx, I think, is a little more flexible, it's a little more modern, and it could do load balancing a little better. But pretty much, the Nginx for us will be serving the static files, so the Vue.js files that are developed when you do the actual, the compiling of the Vue.js files. It'll actually run down to regular static files like HTML, CSS, and JS, just standard files. So it will be serving those files, the front end, and it will also be doing the proxy routes to the Node.js server. So if anyone hits, if the route hits /API, it'll run it to the Node.js server, and the Node.js server will handle all the information there. So that's what Nginx is doing for us. The next thing is we'll have a Node.js Docker container, and that Docker container is literally just running our Node.js backend server stuff, and our server infrastructure, just like it is kind of like locally. You obviously have to change a few variables for development to production, like where your MongoDB connection is pointing, stuff like that. So it was actually fairly smooth to set up the Node.js side. So Docker container just containing our Node.js installation, and then we have MongoDB container just running a MongoDB instance where we can have it connected to our database. So it's just running MongoDB so that Node.js can interface with database. That's all it is. So just three containers. They're all talking to each other, and to make them talk to each other, you have to kind of set them up on the correct ports. And you can do this with a thing called a Docker Compose file. You can do it in many different ways, but I chose to use a Docker Compose file. It seemed like the best way to do it. Like, I don't know why you would, like, especially if you have multiple containers, go in and try to, command line interface every single one of them, because what a Docker Compose file does is it's kind of like a config file for all your containers, and you're allowed to put like, attributes like ports, attributes like volumes, stuff like that, like the very core attributes, kind of in a very easy to digest and to edit format, rather than just having a big line, a CLI, like command line interface line, that just has all those attributes in line, and that those are kind of harder to understand in my opinion, especially when you're first seeing them, rather than seeing the attribute and the property in a separate file, instead of a separate configuration file called the Docker Compose file. So the Docker, like learning all this stuff, learning I had to learn pretty much Nginx from scratch. I had to learn Docker from scratch. I've never used those two things. Then I had to learn how to put Node.js on Docker, put MongoDB on Docker. And then one of the harder things is like, how do they communicate internally? So I know that I knew that they were running, but then I had to make sure that the ports were all set up correctly. I had to make sure that the configuration inside the actual files were set up correctly. That definitely took a long time, and it wasn't one of those it was a very grueling process for me. I know that DevOps is not my thing now, which is it's a good realization to have. I'm not that into to doing any sort of deployments and stuff like that. I'll definitely probably leave this to someone else in the future, but it's good to learn. And I'm glad that I went through this process so that I can kind of understand some things better when I am doing my back-end development or my front-end development. And maybe I can, alleviate some problems that I can foresee in the future with people that are going to be doing the actual deployment. So definitely interesting to learn. And so the other thing is to connect to the DigitalOcean server, all I had to do was SSH. I used PuTTY to connect to it. That was really simple. And then you have to be somewhat familiar with a CLI or command line interface, like a CMD prompt or a terminal prompt, stuff like that. So this is really the condensed version of what we had to go through to develop this site that you should be seeing now. Since this podcast is up, the site should be up at this point at htmlallthethings.com. So definitely check it out and let us know what you think. And like Matt said at the beginning, if we're doing something completely wrong and we're talking about it right now, please let us know, and we'll maybe make an addendum in a future episode, or look at it ourselves and kind of come back with you with why we decided to do what we did. And stuff like that. So I'm definitely not saying that we did everything correctly. I'm glad that what we did worked. I think that's the major thing. Another thing is security is a little bit of an aspect here as well. I actually added a little bit of security to our Mongo database. I don't want to go too far into that because I don't want to give away what I did to make it easier to hack. But the Mongo database is fairly secure. So yeah, that's something that I looked into, and obviously all the passwords are hashed and stuff like that. I did kind of use the common sense security aspect of it. I don't think it's extremely secure. I'm sure if someone really wanted to attack our site, they could get into something. I'm not a security expert in any way, but I'm hoping that for the layman it'll be easier. It'll be one of those a deterrent at least for people not to come in and just screw around if they find something. So that's about it for the development stuff. I'm going to pass it off to Matt if he has any comments on what I've been talking about, or if he wants to just go into the next section, which is web news.
Well, the one thing I would want to say is, you were saying that it's all kind of new to you about the deployment type of stuff. And I think it's important to say that, there's a reason why especially larger companies, but there's a reason why in larger companies there's separate teams for each of these things. So, for the new developer that's listening to this right now, it's it sounds like a lot if they have to spin up a whole bunch of stuff, and then they have to learn the web development themselves, they have to learn the programming, and then they have to learn the different libraries, and then that's learning a mentality and a way of thinking up all its own. But then they also have to learn server administration, that type of thing. There is a reason why, and this is a generalization. Sometimes people know everything, but as a general thing, it's there is a server team in place. There is some sort of other team in place that's there for this exact reason. So I used to just do, for example, server administration, and anything that the people were doing on the actual server, for the most part, I wasn't really involved in. All they said was, I need this application set up in this particular way. I would set it up, and then it's up to them after that. If they need support, maybe they'll contact us and say, hey, is it still working? Yes. Okay, now I got to go figure out why my part of it isn't working, the person, because so I'm just trying to say that don't feel discouraged that there's so much going on, to the listener. And we're kind of a jack of all trades anyway because we've been bouncing around the field for, well, I'd say around 10 years now, including some college in there. So like, just kind of focus on what you're doing, keep going, keep doing what you're doing, and make sure you like read guides and that type of thing. And also a thing for Mike too is that you were saying that like, you would hire somebody else to do that. It's really a mentality thing too. It's like how like if you learn to program, it's like you get into like a programming mindset, I guess is the right way to say it. It's like how you problem solve. It's the same for like a system admin. So it's always like, oh, I need to set this up. I've never set this up, but like where's the config file? Like that's like kind of the next like that's like kind of the next step for everybody normally. Like when you become like sysadmin, like I was for a while, it becomes like a second thought process where you just like immediately start thinking of like the next thing, where it's like, I've never used this thing before, but I know there must be a config file. I never used this thing before, but I know it's not working properly. It's probably something wrong with the firewall. Like you get like an intuition, just like you would with IT, and especially just as you would with programming, and that sort of comes in time. But I thought that was important to mention because people are going to be listening to this because this is a more technical episode, probably our most technical, I would guess.
Hmm.
And people might be like, oh Jesus, like just to spin up a site, I need to learn like all like a million and one things. It's like you have to kind of be jack of all trades, but if you just kind of follow the instruction manual for the most part, you should be fine. And generally, you won't need to know this stuff super in depth because somebody else doesn't know your stuff super in depth, right? So just something to mention, something I thought would be important to say. But I think we can move on to web news. So Mike and I kind of had a discussion before the web news this week. So what we're gonna do is we kind of phrased it. It's gonna be a little bit different. So we kind of phrased it as sort of like if you've listened to our tidbit, we kind of want to have like our tidbit before, which was like a small episode, like a mini episode, was sort of like an impromptu phone call, if you will. So it was just sort of like somebody had recorded the call and we hadn't like actually like scripted it. Like it wasn't scripted, it wasn't planned, it wasn't like right now we're looking at show notes as we do this show, but like there was really no show notes other than some meeting notes that were for no way for presentation purposes. So I think Mike and I were discussing what we want to do for web news is wrapping it up. And we're talking and we'll be sort of discussing, and it's going to sound, it might be like kind of pseudo presentation style, but we're going to be discussing what our next steps are, and it's going to be a very abstract, very, we haven't like, fact checked and that type of thing. This is a very much Mike and I are going to have a meeting essentially on mic about wrapping up the site. Basically, what's our current status, what we need to complete deployment, and specifically, obviously, I'm talking about the HTML All the Things website, and then hopefully, when you guys are listening to this, because like I said, this has been pre-recorded, you'll have something to look at, or you'll have something to look at very soon, because hopefully it will be deployed to some degree. So without further ado, I guess, Mike, I'll let you kick this off because I think you probably have the biggest status update.
Yeah, it's not too big, but I know what I need to do. So pretty much I'm just finishing up the login stuff, and like I was mentioning in the episode, like it involved me having to install a whole new technology called ViewX, and that kind of delayed me a tiny bit because I wanted to make sure that we really needed it or not, and I realized that it just made sense because it's only on one component, not a big deal. So yeah, and then what I did was actually I pulled in all of our login stuff that I developed for Content Collector, and so that's like
Okay.
an old project that we had also in Node.js, and I already had all the authentication stuff server side done on that. So I decided why not just use that and kind of cannibalize it for this, and it's working out pretty well. So that saved me a significant amount of time for the server side stuff. But the front end stuff still needs some work, so I'm still not done login. I will be finished that today, and then the next thing I need to do is pagination still. I do have an idea for that. It should be pretty simple. I was just wondering, I was going to bounce something off you for that though. For pagination, I'm probably going to launch all of them with the load more button.
Okay.
So just every filter will just have a load more button for now. I'm not going to worry about having the 1, 2, 3 like the amount of pages we have in the content. just because we don't have that much content anyway at this point. Like we have quite a bit, but like we're going to be loading 9 per page, I think we decided on, and it's only going to be a couple load mores at most for most of the content. So I think it's okay for a load more for now, and then I will retrofit it to be a a 1, 2, 3 page indicator later on in the future for just the filtered pages. So that is still part of the plan.
Do we want to? So I think we had this discussion before, but do we want to have it so that it's an infinite scroll? Like you said, there's a load more button, but is the load more button sort of automatically clicked, if you will, or engaged when you scroll to it?
Yes, I think I will have it something like that. I'm going to start with the load more button and then see what it takes to just do like, an infinite scroll. I'm sure it'll be fairly simple to implement, but I'm just going to start with the load more button because that's it's easier for me to test with.
Yeah.
To start anyway, so I need it there for now anyway, regardless of anything. So I'm just gonna have it there, and I won't do any too much styling. I'll just put it in the center at the bottom, and then I'll let you style it. It should be pretty easy for you. It's just one button. If we end up using it, like I could remove it and just have it like a loading indicator there, and that's it.
What are we thinking for? Also, I remember we had this discussion, and I think we went back and forth about whether we needed it. Do you still need a blank content, like a collection box?
Yes, I absolutely need that.
Okay, so that's actually like really needed now.
I'm just trying to think, like, I don't know if we 100% need it for the launch. We might not for the launch, but it's
what was it going to be used for?
So it's going to be used for the initial loading screen. So when the actual server request is happening and you don't see anything on the page, you'll just see 6 of those blank content boxes. And then when you actually get all the information back, those 6 content boxes will go away and they'll be replaced with the actual content. That's what I was going to use it for.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, yeah. So like it's obviously like it's like a visual effect.
Yes.
So it's like you don't really necessarily need it for the launch, but okay.
No. Yeah. Exactly.
Because I think I'll be focusing on. I think the nav bars are done, but like I have to move those social icons.
Yeah. Yeah, move the social icons. You also need to look at what social icons we need. Like what I was mentioning was we don't need that medium one up there on the top right of the actual like content pages. Neither do we need the Instagram one because you can't really share on Instagram straight from a website. Just leave Twitter, Facebook, and maybe add Reddit.
I did do that.
Cool.
It is Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit now.
Okay.
I think it was supposed to be G+ as well, but that's obviously
no, we don't need that. Yeah.
I'm just trying to think. Is there anything else that people might want to share to, like maybe email, if they want to like share the link? I'm not really sure how big that is anymore.
No, I don't think we need email right now.
It's something easy to add anyway.
True,
all this stuff is like,
too.
Yeah, it's like no one's gonna be like, man, I can't email this. It's like, well, copy the link, bud.
Yeah.
Like,
okay. So the other thing that I was thinking of is, do we need a landing page that explains what this site is? You know what I mean? Like, so on initial, it could be a one-time view landing page. So I can make it so that if you have a cookie registered with us, you don't see the landing page anymore. Or I can make it, and then I can make it so that you can go back to it at some point with another navigation thing. But should we? I don't know if this is for launch or not. I'm just mentioning it because we haven't talked about it yet. Do we need a landing page that explains what HTML all the things is? With
that's a really good
get
question.
started button at the bottom of it. We can get some graphics done from like a graphics designer for something, like, I don't know, like it could be something where we can make it look, really professional and nice, and really explain our purpose and what the site is about. Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good question too, because right now I think we need some sort of coming soon page to cover up, because it's kind of like at the time of recording this, it is like rather. It's like open right now. You know what I mean? Like it's like people, if people are going there, they're seeing us move things around. Like it's very not production ready.
Yeah.
But yet it's
we
a
haven't
production
announced
environment.
it, so if people are going there, then they're going there at their own risk, kind of thing. It's okay.
Well, the worst thing that's going to happen for them is something's not going to load. But that's a good question, because I think we've had this discussion actually recently with a client where we've actually said to them, like, do we, like they wanted an About Us page, and I said that's kind of dated.
Yeah.
Like there's something about an About Us page that just isn't there. It's really weird. It's like if you go to an institution, like if we had a building, people could ask us what we do, and then we would answer. But like it's not like we have like a plaque saying this is what we do.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm just trying to like equate it. I'm trying to think of it across the board in terms of a physical medium as well as like this is obviously just digital. Is it like is it? I don't know. It's a good question. Like, are people going to be puzzled? Like, if you go to theverge.com or you go to Pocket Now or you go to somebody else like that, like another tech blog, they don't say they might say very briefly somewhere, we're a tech blog, but that's all they'll say. They won't say we're a tech blog that's also on YouTube, come join us. They might say that in like the default like sort of description tag in their theme or something if they're using like a WordPress theme, but like they're not going to generally have that across the site, and there's no not that I remember or see, like not that's obvious, right? Not that's thrown at you an About Us page.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
But are they so big that they don't need that, or are they just not doing that because it's obvious what they are? Like if someone comes to our site and sees a bunch of content blocks that have podcast, snippet, all that stuff, like guide, all there with the title and description, is that enough for them to understand that we are a kind of aggregation of web development content? Because that's what we are, right? Like we're developing web development content for the community, so that it either teaches them, inspires them, or like entertains them.
This is a really interesting like kind of dilemma, like not just with our website, but this is almost like a UX question of the digital medium. Is we used to always have an About Us page, and we will always recommend to customers that are trying to play the local angle to have an About Us page, because then they explain their local story. Like, oh, we're local and organic or whatever, right? We'll always tell those guys, like, yeah, you need a story because like your branding is like reliant on a story, and people need like access to it. But it's like if you go to like I said, like if you go to the like if you go to a site as a new user, are you going to be puzzled? Like if someone comes to HTML or like podcast.html allthethings.com and sees our Podbean site, are they going to be puzzled as to what's going on?
I think that one is a little bit more central, or like there's a central orientation around a podcast on that. It's actually in the title of the URL and stuff like that. I think it's a little bit easier to understand what's going on. Like I actually went to the site right now just to see how it looks and how much sense it makes. And it has a brief description of what we are and what's going on right at the front, right? Like that the first thing you see is kind of like HTML, all the things, web development, small design, the adventures, it describes what's going on. So like we don't really have that right now with the HTML, all the things website. I don't know if we need it.
Like I'm gonna go to like, is there like, okay, so let's think of like a web development site. So if you go to like CSS Tricks is something that pops into my mind. As
like CSS Tricks, actually.
Yeah, like CSS Tricks. There's no explanation here. So it's like CSS. It's like I'm on the CSS Tricks website right now, and the very first article here is building a donut chart with Vue and SVG.
So it's
which
just
is
a bunch
topical.
of content, yeah, up and down. Yeah.
It's just a bunch of content, and it's like, is that because it has the word CSS in the title, and anyone who looking it up is going to understand that? Now, admittedly, we have HTML in the title.
Exactly.
And if you go over the left here, this is kind of where their nav is. They have videos, almanac, gallery snippets, forums, newsletter, and jobs, and guides as well.
Yeah.
So they kind of have a similar thing,
Yes.
where like ours looks totally different.
Yeah.
We don't have an almanac, and our snippets are totally different than this.
They're also they're not designed for 1440p, which is strange to me.
Oh, you're on 1440p?
Yeah. It looks like it's in mobile. I don't know. It's a very strange layout, actually. Like I don't mind it too much, but on 1440p it kind of cuts off. Let me see how it looks on.
Well, that's actually, I mean, this is like off topic, but like this actually is a question of almost a question of ethics. This is almost a question of UX, where it's like, it's like things are, and we talked about this before, like things are designed mobile first. And so it's
Yes.
like where is the cutoff? At what point do we say, well, it's readable on desktop, just leave it? Because an ultra wide monitor, it's like, oh, make a specific thing for ultra wide monitor folks. It's like, no.
Well, no, it's not even ultra wide. Like you see that gray bar at the right? What's that? What's that gray bar? That's there for any resolution. It's just
Well,
everything's
that has ads on it.
Oh, okay. All right, my bad. My bad.
What are you talking about?
I have ad blocker enabled on this.
Damn it.
Well, I'm gonna see. Let me see. I'm gonna turn it off. Yeah, that has ads.
I had no idea what you were talking about. I was so confused. Yeah. I was like, I see that there's quite a bit of padding. I like how this became. I like how this became like a critique of
of CSS
of CSS tricks. But
well, I like the site. Like it's actually a pretty cool site.
Well, I use it quite a bit, to be honest.
Yeah, me too. It's one of my favorite resources actually for explaining stuff, especially like Flexbox and Grid and stuff. Definitely huge. But yeah. So. Yeah, I don't know. I think you're right. I think let's leave it without it for now. Let's forget about the landing page. I just wanted to bring it up because we haven't talked about it yet, and I thought it would be worthwhile to talk about it at least.
Well, no, it is, and I actually think that in terms of content, that's actually something we could discuss in a blog post. It's like where, like at what point, and we could like this would be something we could actually look up, and this would actually help us with our client work as well.
Yeah.
It's like what exactly when or do you ever need in today's age an about us page?
Yeah. And
like, I mean, we have, like I already said, I already gave an example, but like, are we right in that case? Like, we haven't done like a massive case study on it, although it seems to be working for those clients. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just not a lot of people go to it. Like we have the analytics. Yeah, we have the analytics saying that About Us page is one of the least viewed pages. So that on its own tells me that it's just not worthwhile.
Well, do you know, and this is a strange comparison, but do you know what I kind of equate this to is, do you know the YouTube channel Primitive Technology?
Yes, I love that channel.
Well, one of the things that he said, and I'm paraphrasing from like a comment I read like years ago, is that he said something like he doesn't like really talking in tutorials. He just kind of like fast forwards to the part where the person actually shows it. Yep. And that's kind of what he does with his tutorials.
Yep.
I kind of feel like we're becoming like that, like just maybe as humans or something, where like, for example, on a website, it's like, I don't care what this About Us page says. I could read it and understand it, or I could just poke around for 2 minutes and then be like, oh, this is a blog.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's true.
Because it's not like even something like, okay, if you go to like a web app, and you go to, let's go to like Asana. I'll open an incognito and I'll just like go to Asana not signed in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they have an explanation of what's going on, but it's like it's not like they're writing paragraph upon paragraph upon paragraph. It's just like we do task management and like stay on track and blah 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 blah, right? And then it's like sign up or like then you can click for more details. A lot of I'm estimating that a lot of people would literally just be like, okay, and they'll sign up for the free tier. Mm-hmm. What is this? I think people want to like learn it by like experiencing it now, I think. Obviously that, like, I mean, we're getting kind of in depth on a question about a landing page, but it's a good question to ask.
Yeah. So yeah, okay. So let's take it back to planning, like when we're going to be deploying this. So I still have, I'd say, a pretty significant amount of work to do, but I could probably get like a good chunk of it done today. That's the plan. Tomorrow I'm leaving. Friday I'm going to be working again on it. My intention is to be done by Friday with my stuff.
Okay.
Or what's your timeline looking like? I'm going to say Friday. Worst case, I'm going to do like a full day Monday on it as well.
Okay.
If I need to. So like Friday, Monday is my thought process. What are you thinking?
Well, I'll just literally say what I have to do. That I have written down. So I've done a bunch, but I'll just say what I have on my Asana little list thing now. I have full post typography, which is actually just pending your opinion, which I forgot to message you about.
Yeah.
Because I actually did it. So the typography on full post pages is done.
Cool.
So I'll let you, like, you know, just I just need an opinion on it.
So should I pull and look? Is that what you mean?
Sure. Yeah. On my branch. Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
So that I have to fix page length at least 100% height at all times because I noticed it was getting cut off. Like
Okay.
if we only had 3 in, it would only go to 75% approximately of the page height. And
Mm-hmm.
that looks really stupid. So like at least the background color, because we have like just like gray background color. That background color should be full height. Um, so I need to fix that. Make a footer. I already have the component created, and it literally just says ASDF. And then I need to make it so that it disappears on mobile because I don't think we need one on mobile. Because we have our like navicon or our like nav menu there,
Mm-hmm.
but it'll be for desktop experience and probably some tablets. And then I need to move the social media icons on mobile, and then really that's it. In terms of actual, like I only really wrote down needed functionality
Yeah, for the release, I understand. Yeah.
because other stuff would include like, okay, let's do a box shadow with like some transitions. Let's
Yeah.
have some nice animations. Let's have
Mm-hmm.
some nice like hover effects and that type of thing. I mean, I might be able to get that done. Like a lot of those things, like once you do all this other stuff, a lot of that, like all that type of stuff is like a day where you just kind of go around and go like, oh, it'd be nice if, and then you just do it.
Yeah.
And so like there's some stuff that doesn't have hover effects and that type of thing. But like I think that those 4 things I just listed, which is essentially 3 and 1 with an opinion, is vital. Like that because I've already done a bunch. I added the reading containers so that it limits the width. It limits the width of the reading area. So that's all gone. Like you know what I'm trying to say, right? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
where I
for sure.
limit the
Yeah.
limit the reading area for
Mm-hmm.
the width. And then I fixed I fixed the cover so that the cover photo isn't like affected by the padding anymore.
Cool.
And I fixed the so I almost had it where I would need you. So this was something that was kind of major, not major, but it had been like a pain in the ass. Was so Podbean offers 2 widgets, a square and a rectangle, and the square one is, in my opinion, a little bit more mobile focused. On really small screens, our rectangle one, which is like obviously a rectangle in landscape, gets really squished.
Mm.
And so I was like, oh, maybe we should have 2, and then we'll embed both, but only one will display. But then I realized when I squished down to the mobile size of the size that I wanted with the rectangle and the square, both of them got squished.
Oh, that's dumb. Okay.
So because it's iPhone 5 and our titles are longer.
Yeah.
So what I did was I left the widget for the podcast unkempt, so it will touch the edges, which I mean it won't touch the edges. It will go closer to the edge than anything else, but it makes it actually functional on down to an iPhone 5 screen.
Yeah.
Which I think is like critical, and like it just works a lot better because if your functionality is blocked on a widget, that widget's totally useless.
Yep.
So I mean that was one smaller thing. That like I mean it was a larger thing in terms of UI because I would have had to ask you to make another thing in JSON, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay. So that
but
sounds like you can definitely get it done by Friday. Like those 4 things.
yeah, because I did a bunch this week already because I
Okay.
was waiting for a while too, right? Remember?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you
So-
were waiting for like at least a whole week, if not more. But yeah. So I think that makes sense. So you can definitely get it done by Friday. So that means we're pretty much on track with maybe launching Monday, Tuesday next week. Yeah. Because you're leaving on Wednesday, right?
Yeah, I'm leaving on Wednesday, and then I won't be back to the following
Yeah.
following Monday.
So let's aim for launching on Tuesday because that's when this episode will probably come out, actually. Right?
Well, no, wait, no, that's wrong. This episode is 2 weeks in advance.
No, but we can. What I'm thinking is that if we release this episode next week, if we're able to launch on Tuesday.
Oh, then launch this episode, but we'll still record normally, and then
Yes.
that episode will be my holiday one.
Correct. Yeah. If we.
I mean,
can.
they're both kind of my
we have
holiday
some-
one because
yeah.
I'm away for both of them.
Yeah. Exactly. So we have some padding on it. So I'm aiming to be done by Friday, worst case Monday, and then we can launch on Tuesday. That seems like it's reasonable unless something terrible happens. Yeah. So that's it. I think that's the plan. Let's stick to that.
Yeah, that sounds good. So, just to confirm, we want all this done by now. 1 sec. Do we need to like check it all in or anything for Friday? Like
Yeah,
into
if you
Git,
can
or-
check your stuff in for Friday, that would be like ideal for me because then I can see if anything conflicts with my check-in, with my like if I have to do a merge or anything like that. Not that that's an issue because the worst case merge happened already and it was not that bad.
it was honestly done over the phone over like a 3-minute period.
Yeah, exactly. That's the worst case merge that could possibly have happened. so I'm not too worried.
Yeah, that sounds good to me though. Like because it's coming together and it's very, I think for the user it's still going to be a very Gen 1 thing, but that's exactly what it is because we literally learned every piece of the puzzle.
Yep. And we're definitely going to keep expanding on it consistently, like week after week after week. It's probably going to be expanding at least once per week in deploying. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good plan. I think we're
actually wait a second. When's the data entry?
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Next week we'll have to.
I found a problem with data entry, by the way. Okay. Actually, sorry to cut you off there, but like they're in the pod, and I think this is a Podbean problem, but I don't want to point fingers because I don't know. I find that I can't copy in Podbean even onto other word processors. I can't seem to copy an indented point, like an indented bullet point.
Okay.
And when we copy and paste into the hat website, I can't remember whether the indented bullet points don't indent at all, but they appear, or whether they don't appear. And so my last set of show notes, I tried to, because I'm trying to make the show notes less of a reading material and more of a reference to the show. Because like I used to write them so detailed, or like not like super detailed, but I used to write them detailed enough that like you could just kind of read that and get the gist without listening. But I kind of feel like it should be more of a show guide. So my last one, I didn't do any indented episodes. But like if we're going to be doing data entry, we're going to have older episodes in there, and I'm not really going to be redoing those show notes.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just something to keep in mind. Like I think it might be something to do with how Podbean is showing the indented bullets, because it doesn't seem to be copying right. Like I can't even get it to copy into like Google Docs.
Yeah, well, if you can't get it to copy into Google Docs, I probably won't be able to do much because I just use the plugin for the editor. So
like you can do it if you copy each point individually. But what I mean is when we do data entry, it's going to be like that.
A pain, yeah. I mean, those sub points might just have to be kiboshed for now, because we need to get the data in there.
Okay.
Worst case, this is the worst case scenario. But I'm thinking the data entry should be like heavily Monday, Tuesday. We can try to just hit it real hard and get it all. I
mean, a lot of it's copy paste. To be fair.
Well, I mean, all of it pretty much is copy paste, but it's going to take some time because there's a lot, like especially the availability bar will take like a good 5 minutes per episode or something like that. I think. Maybe we can get it down.
No. I got it already in Trello. All you can do is copy paste.
That's good. Yeah.
You just literally go and it's like, oh, what episode is this? Episode 1. You just copy the link.
Yeah.
So that is one thing that we're ready for sure. Okay. Like that's what I mostly use Trello for, is a data dump.
Okay.
An organized one.
So either way, let's aim for Monday, Tuesday to be data entry. So.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So we can get it all in.
One final thing is the admin panel. Does that need to be styled before the launch?
No.
Okay, but it can be.
Yes.
And what can I touch in there?
Like any of the styling, you can style it as you want. It's just HTML.
Can I like wrap it? Can I add more IDs and more classes, or is that going to mess up your stuff?
No, it should be fine as long as you keep the classes that I have intact.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you were like reading into class names and being like, first child, I want this to apply to this, and then if I change the first child.
Yeah, I understand. I don't think I'm doing that at all, so I think you should be fine. I'm binding it literally to the Vue.js variables.
Okay.
So it should be fine.
All right. Well, I think we have our work cut out for us for sure.
Yeah.
But
good to go.
I'm ready to go, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we've covered it all. Like, we've been talking about this so much. Like, oh my god.
It'd be nice to have it out there.
Yeah.
And getting torn apart by our audience. Please tear us apart.
Well, the main thing I want from this is like all the time that we're putting into this will then be put into content. And I think there's going to be so much more content pouring out, because I'm going to literally like wake up, and if I don't have a client work thing to do, and be like, what content am I making today? Not, oh, what, I have to fake the footer. Like, so, okay. Yeah, sounds good. I don't know if you have any more comments, but I think I'm good myself.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Well, if you listen to this point, thank you very much. Thanks for listening. And make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on the platform of your choice. Yeah, you can also follow us on the socials at HTML All the Things for Facebook and Instagram, at HTML Everything for Twitter. We're on Medium, we're on GitHub, and we're also on Reddit. Remember, we have that Reddit application thing, which you can listen to in the previous episode. and or episode, what is that episode named, just in case, because this episode order sounds like it's going to get messed up. The episode is named Gathering Project Scope and Requirements, so make sure you listen to that if you are interested in becoming a Reddit admin or mod or whatever they call that for our subreddit. And remember, we're on Patreon, which is patreon.com/htmlallthethings. Take a look at the tiers, give that a go. Feel free to comment, or it's free for you to leave a comment or a review on the platform you're listening to this on, and we are signing off.